already. I'm hoping it makes it a little easier with my board. They seem to struggle with Google Hangout. So anyway, I am really excited. This is a hot topic this year. Everywhere I go, schools want to talk about how you can merge or marry the notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion with community engagement and partnership programs. And how does one do that efficiently, well, with purpose, etc., in a school? I recently was able to well, two things. I was in Chicago last spring, where Ken was, and he and some of his colleagues gave this amazing presentation about this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that can really support the work of community engagement and partnership. And then I invited Ken to come with me to the Association of Independent Schools in New England, where we did another presentation similar to that, and we highlighted some schools that are doing this well. A couple of you were mentioned, if you felt your ears burning. And so it's great to see the reception of everybody talking about this. Ken is going to talk a tiny bit about how he thinks this could work well in schools, and then we are going to open it up for conversation, questions, discussion. I will be happy to share everybody's contact information with each other afterwards. I know a bunch of you know each other, but not everybody is familiar. But you all are really focused and driven and purposeful practitioners of this work, and so I think half of the benefit of this conversation is connecting with each other across the country. And being able to share your thoughts and your work. So Ken, if you would introduce yourself, and I'm going to keep you to like 15 minutes, okay? And then we'll open it up for conversation, just so that we don't run out of time for everybody to get their questions and their discussions going, if that works. Is that good?
Great. I probably won't need 15 minutes, but more than happy to answer as many questions as needed. Great. And to participate in the conversation as well. So thanks, Blake. I'm Ken Garcia-Gonzalez. I have two friends up there in this Brady Bunch kind of thing, Aaron and Guyby, and I'm happy to meet the other three individuals. But I have been in education for 20 years. My background is in ethnic studies and history, but I've been a dean of students as well as an administrator in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I've also taught civic engagement and service learning. So that's kind of a little bit of my background. I guess the first thing that I'll say, and I'm probably speaking to the choir, so hopefully these are maybe just good reminders, but there's enough academic readings, literature, and backing that say that the best civic engagement programs, the best service learning programs, and I'm using all of those words loosely. It doesn't matter to me how you define civic engagement, community service, community learning, service learning. To me, they're all I'm using that word very loosely in the context of this conversation, but all of the academic writing out there states clearly that diversity has to be included in those programs, in that work, or else you're not really truly doing the work. And that might be judgmental and a harsh thing to say, but there's enough academic backing to back that up. And I say academic backing mainly to naysayers or to, boards or administrators that may not necessarily be receptive or open to that idea. I'll use Tania Mitchell's a quote from Tania Mitchell, who wrote, who is one of the, the main people behind critical service learning. And she has this question where she says, the role of identity in critical service learning raises an important question. Can students truly understand poverty if they do not understand their own race, class, and gender identities in the context of systemic inequity? And I think without the identity development piece, without the diversity education, right, then we're truly doing all of our students a disservice. We're putting them in actually dangerous spaces where, we're not giving them the space or the room, to be reflective. It doesn't matter what model of service learning you have, if you have the traditional model or the critical service learning model by Mitchell, They all include a reflection component. You can look at any model, and if we're not giving students the space to reflect, and if we're not giving students the ability to reflect on and not just their experiences, but how their own identities are impacting their experience, when they're going out into the community, then we are really, I think, setting up our students for failure. Blake asked me to kind of present, I guess, some ideas of how to make this work. I think for me, I would highly encourage, an ethnic studies program. Ethnic studies as a discipline has been around for 60 years. It started in the Bay Area, but again, there is enough content frameworks to be able to teach not just ethnic studies, but one of the core tenets of ethnic studies is identity development, and be able to teach students social construction theory. Now, I don't know if the participants, Blake, are lower school, middle school. Regardless, I mean, you wouldn't use social construction theory with first and second graders, but you can talk to young students about, identity in its most basic forms. So, you can talk about gender, or boys and girls and everything in between, and so forth and so forth. But I would definitely, investigate and begin to implement some social construction theory and content. I think within an ethnic studies program as well, all of the education and lesson plans and, work on stereotypes and stereotype threat. Again, these are no longer new terms. I think there is enough education where these kinds of ideas and concepts can be implemented. I think stereotypes are really important, and stereotype threat is really important in the sense that, again, are we reinforcing stereotypes when we put students out into the community, when we're not prepping them well enough in terms of, who they are and what is their background and what has shaped their own experiences. But again, giving them the language and the tools to be able to recognize, their own stereotypes, the stereotypes that they have, stereotypes projected on them, and prepping them when they go out into the community, what are the stereotypes that they're going to see, because it's going to happen. And I think that's the beauty about this work is that, if you don't prep them, it's all of the negative things that you can imagine about these programs and about these experiences, they will take place, right? They're going to take place. And so it compels us to have to prepare the students, appropriately. Or else we may be doing more damage, not just to the program or the reputations of the schools, but really, if we think of the students at the center, we may be reinforcing behavior or thinking that we definitely want to counter, as 21st century educators. The other thing that I'll say is that in terms of just ethnic studies content, again, one of the tenets of ethnic studies content also is just, the embracing of just youth culture and youth movement. And so if you look at civil rights in this country, there's an opportunity to involve students in looking at just youth history and how young people have been instrumental in pretty much every single movement that you can think of. So if you think of the Children's Brigade, during the civil rights movement, it's just another way to engage students to be empathetic, to be proactive, and to be change agents is by teaching them, history and where children are involved and where they have made a difference. And so, historically, if you're sending students out in the community to do food drives or whatever, you can make ties to maybe just larger movements that students and young people have been involved in. I could talk more in depth about the 4-year program at the Urban School of San Francisco. I'm sure Guyby and Aaron are probably familiar with that program, being in the Bay Area. But I mean, again, I think I use that as a prime example. I'm biased because I used to work there. But I do believe it is a strong program because they have dedicated classroom time to ethnic studies and identity development. It's not through advisory, it's not after school, it's not hours based. You actually have to take that course, to graduate from the school. So not is it only a required component of their 4-year service learning program, it is a graduation requirement. And then the beauty of like ethnic studies and identity development, obviously, is that it has impacts not just in civic engagement, but it also has impacts in the other classrooms. We've had teachers in academic disciplines, namely in English and in history, report back that their conversations have gotten deeper and more meaningful because students are having a racial analysis, a gender analysis, a labor analysis, a sexual orientation analysis when looking at content in these other courses. So I can speak more to that program if you guys like, but that might be too granular for the purposes of this conversation. But I guess those are just kind of some of my basic ideas around how to make civic engagement and DEI come together. But to me, I'll be pretty blunt. I don't think you have a program without it, to be blunt and honest.
I personally would love to hear more about it. I think one of the benefits is just sharing ideas. Obviously, it's not going to be a cookie cutter where we can just go replicate what Urban is doing elsewhere. But the one thing I'm going to suggest, Ken, is if you go up into your upper right-hand corner, you can switch the view and you'll see that there are 12. I think you can only see a handful of faces.
Oh, is there more than, okay, grid. Oh, hello.
Yeah, so I wanted you to, I thought you might not recognize that there were more, you were speaking to more people.
Hello, hello.
So to answer your first question was what age range everybody's working with, I would say we should just cover K-12 because lots of people here are K-12 practitioners, K-8, some with middle school, but I think really we have to talk about this with a whole K-12 perspective. But by some nodding heads, do we agree that we'd like to hear a little bit more about Urban and how they get their ethnic studies into their classrooms? Yes or no? And I can see you all. Yes, sure, good. Gyvi and Aaron can just tune out for now. So just briefly share a little bit about.
Can I just ask a quick question? Ken, is this the program that Amy Arginal runs?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I heard her speak. It's worth talking about because it's a really incredible program.
Right. So the program that Amy and I developed again. So freshman year, the way that we talked, it's backwards design, right? So freshman year, we purposely don't even send out the students into the community. They do not participate in any form of service learning or civic engagement because we want to make sure that they have, the foundational pieces around reflection, establishing reflection protocol, giving them the tools and the language and the terminology around ethnic studies and around identity development. So freshman year is purely, it feels like an academic course. There are readings, on identity development, a lot of lesson plans where we get them to explore their own identity. That allows us to talk about, the implications of identity around stereotype, around bias, and most importantly, around privilege. So freshman year, the course is purely quote unquote academic. It feels like an academic class. They have homework. They're learning about theory. They're looking, I guess the historical text that they read is on the social construction of race. And we use that as a model for them to then be able to explore the social construction of class, the social construction of gender, sexual orientation, and so forth. Sophomore year is the first time that we actually send them out into the community. But again, sophomore year, it's scaffolded in the sense that we send them out in groups. So there are already established groups in the classroom. So again, it's dedicated classroom time. This is not the advisor. This is someone like Amy who has background in teaching this, or this is someone like anyone in the service learning department who has experience teaching this content. So it's not just giving a script to an advisor. Urban is very intentional about the program and treating it like a program. So sophomore year, we kind of handhold them. We have 4 established nonprofit partners that we have a long history with, and we send students out to these 4 nonprofits in groups of 4 to 5. So again, it's scaffolded. I think that piece is really important in terms of the reflection, because we're not sending students solo, to the food bank or to the garden. We're sending them in groups so that they have an opportunity to kind of process and experience it together. And then finally, by junior year, I guess the academic strand is, we name it, we are looking at privilege, we are looking at social inequity. And Amy's put together a really strong reader, which I can probably get from her to share with you, but it is looking at and investigating social inequity. It is looking at, the wealth gap. It is looking at the achievement gap. I mean, there's all of this. We look at this content to really investigate, power and privilege. And by junior year, the expectation is that they go out as an individual to establish their own, we call it an internship, in a nonprofit of their choice. One of the structures that Amy developed was this idea, I think, and she may have borrowed it from elsewhere, I don't know, but it's called the, values, I have it written down, values, skills, and passions model. And so you get each student as a junior to identify what are your passions, what are you passionate about, what are your values, and then what are your skills. And so that gives a lot of room for any student, to pursue, I guess, an internship, of their choice. And so, we've had students where they may not necessarily be into social justice, but they are skilled at web design. And so we try to pair them up, with a nonprofit organization that can utilize their skill. And so we're not expecting to create change agents, every single kid to be a change agent as it relates to, the core values around civic engagement, because we know that students, like adults, are all over the place. But we're also at least just trying to tap into who they are as individuals and, potentially open doors for them. And then senior year is, a second year of the internship. Many of our students decide to go back, to their nonprofit and do further work. Sometimes by senior year, they want to mix it up because they've changed as well. But it's basically an extension of junior year, a little bit more deeper, a little bit more on, I guess, the skill building side as it relates to job skills. We call it job skills, if you will. But that's essentially the 4-year program. But again, there is content, there is readers. It is a 4-year program that is designed and scaffolded to get them from a 14-year-old to an 18-year-old. I'm hoping that some of that can be transferable to the younger ages, if you will. So,
Ken, can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So I just had a junior finish his term with me. He worked with me for the first half of the school year. So he did his internship at the Cathedral School. And so he was my assistant for this year, where he helped create our multicultural student group webpage. He also helped create content for my identity class for 6th graders. He also helped facilitate conversations where there's conflict with kids that were dealing with race issues on campus. So he was a great resource. And so this guy came once a week for about 2 hours. So from 8:30 to about 10:30. So actually I'm filling out his evaluation as we speak. So it was a pretty amazing experience to have a former alumni come and then actively do these things within the school day. And it was pretty amazing.
Awesome. Yeah.
That sounds great. Open up for questions. Feel free to speak freely.
Ken, just a logistical question. In that 10th grade, when they're going in groups of 4 or 5, is that during the school day?
Yes, it's built into the day, so it's not in extra. We have a rotating block schedule. So at least once a week, we have 2-hour classes. So our rotating block, I mean, everybody's got a different schedule, right? Our classes are typically an hour and 10 minutes, and then we have a block schedule that allows each class to be 2 hours and 10 minutes long. So sophomore year, again, we've been very strategic with the nonprofits to be within 10 to 15 minutes of the school. We benefit from being in the Upper Haight. And needless to say, it's San Francisco, it's the Upper Haight. There's a lot of social services and need in the community. So the 2-hour block is enough time, not only for the sophomores to go out and get to see San Francisco, but it allows them, the juniors and seniors, to do that as well. Sometimes they'll block it off. Their block period will bump up against after school or against lunch, and that turns into actually a 3-hour session where they can be on site. And then again, in terms of just the independence and the identity development, we allow them to figure out how to get back to campus to and from their internship to their campus. I don't know if that makes sense. It might be, yeah. So you can have a block from 12:20 to 2:45, and they don't have to come back to campus. They can stay at their internship until 3:30, 4 o'clock, or 5 p.m.
So, in terms of like liability now, do your parents have to fill out because it's during this, like our students do service on their own as well, but it's not during the school day. And so I don't go with them there. It's entirely unchaperoned. So, but when it's during the school day, then sometimes I feel like I need to get a special permission slip. Is that just because it's how your program runs? It's like part of the contract that the
it's
parents
just part of, it's just part of the work. So for example, we have classes, academic classes, quote unquote, California studies, where, they go out every week. And that teacher has already established protocol where they don't have to get special permission every week. It's just, This is part of the urban experience.
Great, thank you.
Oh, Rachel, I think you're on mute.
No audio.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. I had a question, which is about the academics portion of this, especially in freshman and sophomore year. Is it graded? Is it pass fail? Is there a rubric that you have for evaluating students, and what kind of feedback do they receive? Do they get written reports quarterly? Is it just like any other academic class?
That's a great question. So, the program, it's pass fail, namely because it's, how do you grade someone's development around identity or racial awareness? And so, it is pass fail because we cannot come up with hard assessment tools to be able to measure, how far along a student's come in terms of identity. So it is pass fail. Like other academic courses, though, they do get graded daily on work. They have to turn in journals every week, and they do get a narrative evaluation just like any other course. And I think the narrative evaluation is actually completely appropriate for a class like this, because you can say, Johnny, has really come a long way in terms of, recognizing the biases that he has. In the beginning, he didn't believe that he had biases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say, the narrative evaluations are, yes, it feels like an academic course, for parents and for students, but I think for this type of class and this type of work, I think it's important to be able to name that beyond just a P or an F.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any other questions? I want to pose a question to everybody, in that this model seems, I don't want to say easier, because it's they're all complicated and they all have their issues. But the part that I struggle with having, like Ken alluded to, lots of this work being happening in advisories and not happening in classroom, is that there's this expectation that your classroom teachers are trained and competent in this work. And so if you don't have a dedicated team of people who are really truly trained, and this is their content mastery, how do you empower your teachers to facilitate these programs and these conversations and this identity exploration when really they went to grad school to study U.S. history? So again, you all know I'm not actually in the school in a classroom on a day-to-day basis, but am I right in thinking that that is a hurdle? No.
This is Lori, and I'm going to say I think that's a challenge with many things, Blake. As we've been talking about, I'm at Oregon Episcopal School in Portland, and I think it's a challenge with everything. When you think about affinity groups and advising affinity groups and what background people bring to that as advisors, I think the service learning piece, there's an amazing challenge there, right? Because they also have to be knowledgeable of the community and the organizations that they go to. So that was going to be that was one of the questions I had, is what kind of time is given to teachers to really embed in the organizations and understand them? It sounds like Urban's been at this a while, but how do you onboard new teachers into the ethnic studies program, and have you had to?
Okay, so as far as onboarding teachers in the ethnic studies program, I mean, well, I guess the first thing I should say is that, yeah, so we don't hire individuals. Okay, I'm no longer at Urban, but when I was there, we don't hire individuals that don't have that background. It would just be like, you're not going to hire someone to teach literature if they have a science background. And so I think, and that's from the head of school, and which I think is important to bring up, because he is, with the guidance of the head of school, it is considered a real program, just like math, just like science, just like English, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we don't necessarily onboard individuals to teach these classes if they don't have the expertise or the background to do so. I will say that a lot of the ethnic studies content, oftentimes the ethnic studies department or the service learning department is leaned on heavily, when we do advising around, diversity issues as they come up. So Black Lives Matters, how are we going to deal with this? Then oftentimes, the other faculty will then look towards this department to kind of help guide that process. And then obviously we try to resist that, because you should have that skill set working in a school in the United States of America in the 21st century. It's not an add-on. It's not something that's separate. We all know that DEI exists in science and in math, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But obviously in partnership with the head of school and with the rest of the department, you try to make that work and you try to share that knowledge. But I hope that answers your question. Yeah, at least Urban is in a position where they can do that. They are afforded that privilege to be able to say, we're not just going to hire, the math teacher who happens to be a person of color who is interested in diversity. It doesn't work that way. You would never do that for any other discipline. But I know that some schools are forced to do that because they may not have access to those individuals.
How do the rest of you find that you are onboarding your teachers or converting teachers who've been at your school for a long time into this practice? Because I mean, urban sounds fantastic. I don't necessarily know that every school has that luxury of having it considered a complete and total academic entity. And we all know that having your administration and your head of school, even talking about it in job interviews would probably set the standard a little bit. But how are the rest of you, I mean, to have all of us have the chance to answer Dory's question about how are you getting your teachers to become full participants in your work?
I can speak to that. I think Blake, you started to give the answer that I was going to give to some degree. I think for us, and I know most of you on this call, but I'm Allison. I'm at Rat Country Day School in New York. I think that our hurdles in onboarding actually go back to 2 or 3 levels from the question of content expertise in DEI. I think it goes back to just the underlying assumptions, Ken, that you were talking about at the beginning, that this is integral to any kind of service learning work. So not just do faculty have the content or not, but also do they understand what that connection is? And then to take it back one level further, Blake, to what you were just alluding to and what Ken spoke to earlier as well, the questions for us, I think, of where our administration is in this, and looking at sort of pulling at some of the threads of a long-standing traditional community service program and making sure that that change process goes back constantly to the administration. I think that's such an important part. So that's where I see our hurdles. The content piece is a part of it, but I don't see it as the first piece to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what I hear you referring to, Allison, is, and maybe I'm not processing this exactly the same as what you're saying, but political will. Part of it is kind of the will of the administration to take a visible public stand that DEI is important to our institution. And in some schools, among maybe a parent base that's not sensitive, informed, interested, they are our market. So it's, I think school to school and market to market, these are different stories. This is not one story. San Francisco is so different than the Midwest, than much of the Midwest. And where a school is and how, what its level of diversity is, socioeconomic and racial, ethnic diversity is, very different. So just because we're independent schools doesn't mean we're the same schools. And if there is a culture that comes from religious tenets of having, a place in the social, in improving kind of social standing and equity for everyone, then that's a whole other thing. That place, that almost means that it's as important as your school mission. So these are just, our schools are very different, I think, is one of the contextual kind of things to recognize. But also, yeah, I've long felt that that service learning, civic engagement work, philanthropy, education in schools is both hampered and has an opportunity because we're often connected to advisory. In many schools, we don't have the opportunity to, or maybe the will of administration to create special classes and the resources to create whole programs. And so within what we're given, the space that we can work, at least initially, how do you work in advisory when there is not the capacity for many advisors to have uncomfortable conversations, to understand how you deal with identity? They don't have the background. Many of us don't necessarily have the background. That's why people like Ken are so valuable to us as learners, because we don't have the experience or background. Even if we are people of color, it doesn't, I feel uncomfortable talking about privilege with white male students because I'm not from that background, for instance. So we all come to this work with a from a context, but we're also placed in a context that's really important to recognize. But I think capacity building for advisors, if this work happens in advisory, is just so essential. It's like service learning, not understanding what reflection is and how to do it well, and its importance is also one of those things I think that hampers our progress. At least I've found in the schools where I've worked.
I think that's what I was alluding to was this notion that where we can get this work done is great. And not every school has the opportunity to have a 2-hour block and a really well thought out, 9-12 program. And so how do we help the schools, how do we meet the schools where they are and meet you where you are and help you push just a little bit to have it a little bit closer to what would be your ideal for your culture and your community. Because it's so true, as I go around the country, every geographic region is so incredibly different. And I love what Ken said when he was saying, like, I'm just using these words loosely because we're all talking about the same thing, but we all use different words. And so civic engagement, community engagement, partnership, whatever you call it. But I really feel like if we could support teachers in advisory programs, we would be helping get more allies of this work within our school community, and more people comfortable having these sort of uncomfortable conversations with their kids.
Well, I always wonder if you all have come across, like, if there was going to be one reading that you would give that you would make a common point of discussion and professional development, or one specific kind of training exercise that you would use. But I always feel like common experience, common language, common understanding, if they're kind of about, top 5 resources to connect service learning to DEI, for instance, would be really useful, because you can buy some influence, I think, PD time in most schools.
I just read one. I'm looking for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Damaris.
But I don't care. Oh, here it is. It's here. This is from, can you see it? Is it backwards?
No.
Oh, good. Has everybody seen this? It's from the Community Works Institute. It's from higher ed, but it's very, very, I thought it was a very, very practical article that sort of lays out what we've been talking about and then gives very practical recommendations for teaching. And, pedagogical tools for critical motivation. 1, storytelling. 2, identifying past successes. 3, action teams. I mean, it's just very practical, and it's just the latest thing that I've read that I think is really helpful. But it also it's not a good starting point for what we're talking about. This is an article that would be helpful for this group, but for faculty that you're trying to convince, this is probably not the right starting point. I mean, I start with our 9th graders who read the Beverly Daniels Tatum Complexity of Identity essay. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with that, Luana?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Beverly Daniels Tatum has an essay called The Complexity of Identity, Who Am I? It's like 5 pages, and you can read it aloud during the class time, and then talk about it. And that's sort of an accessible entry point for students and faculty also, it could be.
Thank you.
I'm thinking about, well, first off, Ken, thank you so much. It's always great to hear your thoughts, and I connect so much with the great work that you've done at Urban and beyond. So I'm just grateful for what you've had to add to the conversation. I'm thinking about, in terms of, there was a question around resources. There was our admissions director a couple years ago read, I believe it was a biography or an autobiography by Walt Disney, talking about how he created this whole experience within Disney World or Disneyland or something like that. and they had as this mantra, everything speaks. So the moment that you step onto Disney World's property, like everything is coming at you to create this type of experience, you know, from the ears to the costumes to the rides and all that kind of stuff. And it all creates an experience, and it all reflects the values, the culture, the mission of what he was trying to impart on people who were going through that experience. So translating that to our respective communities, this idea of everything speaks has really been kind of in the front of our thinking. And when you come into a school, whether you're a prospective or a visitor or an employee or a parent, what is your experience? You know, what do you see in the halls? What do you see on the walls? Taking even a closer look, when you look at a schedule, where do you allocate time? Time is a scarce resource, and where you commit that time is a value, is where your priorities lie. Looking at allocations of faculty, staff, administration, again, everything speaks. So do you have a service learning department, or is it partitioned out amongst other faculty and staff as a add-on or as a release time? You know, everything speaks in terms of schedule. Do you prioritize this in terms of what you're losing in terms of class time or what you're gaining in terms of class time? So that kind of notion, that mindset, everything speaks, it's really interesting. And you know, I'll just say from my perspective here, San Francisco Friends School, Quaker school, our values are, you know, front and center of Quaker values, which I feel like are kind of universal values. But one thing is I speak at our open house tours. I'm the director of community engagement. And in the open houses, we have 2 big open houses. We have, you know, several hundred folks that come through the doors, and I am one of the rotations that parents all go through. So they'll go through a math session. There's 4 rotations. There's a math session. I think there's like a reading, writing session. There's an equity and inclusion session. And then there's mine in terms of community engagement. Those are the 4 sessions that every parent who is a prospective who comes for our open house, they're sitting there learning about this work. So again, everything speaks. That is lifted up as just as important as not in replace of or in addition to, it's right there front and center with what we do as a school. So I think it could be interesting to everyone here to kind of look at, again, starting from mission and vision and what that looks like in the lived experience of students and faculty. And you may find some ways that is enhanced and lifted up. There may be enormous disconnects as well, but I kind of feel like that mission, vision, values piece is always a great starting point, but at least for conversation and reflection and to ask some really big questions. And it touches on everything. Hiring, you know, what are the priorities that we're looking for with new hires? Administration and staff, you know, is there a disconnect there? Are we asking these questions as well? How does that reflect our mission and values? I mean, these are difficult conversations to have sometimes, but I feel like that's at least where you can get that. And I understand that is a challenge. You're the only one in your school who is raising these questions, you know. It's hard to be alone. It's hard to be the only person in isolation doing that. So I totally get that is challenging as well, but maybe that's a good starting point in terms of looking at culture and context and at least areas for growth and shifts.
One resource that I've been using lately is the vision deployment matrix. I don't know if most of you are familiar with that, where it looks at the vision, whatever theme you're generating. So currently right now we're working on service learning and how that's reflected, or how is multicultural education reflected in our service learning program. So we're looking at vision. What is our mental model with that approach? What are the systemic structures? what are the patterns in events. So we look at all of those things, and we look at our current reality and then our desired reality, and what are the gaps with that. And so that's been really helpful with our, our small admin think tank of, are we really, as your guy was talking about, what culture are we trying to create, and where are blind spots and gaps, and really how are the systemic structures really reinforcing that. And so that's much more of a clear and articulate narrative than this is how we feel, this is what we think is going on. So that's been pretty eye-opening for our community. For example, we did one a couple years ago about how are Black boys in our school, how effectively are they thriving in our community? And one of the events that we started to create, and what really is very eye-opening, was 6 of our 8 boys that were expelled were Black boys. And what did that event mean, right? What did that mean about our community when we looked at the events and how that was supported through the patterns, our mental model towards Black boys on campus, and our systemic structures and our vision of how we created a thriving community for them. So that's one model that's been really effective in our community over here.
What was that called, Aaron? Mission deployment?
Vision deployment matrix.
Okay, matrix.
Yep. It's the second version. There was a first one, but we've been utilizing the second one.
I think another resource that I have to offer, and this is actually one that I've gained in the last 2 years. I mean, my background is in working in high schools, but in my last position at University of Chicago lab schools, I was doing this work K through 12, and so I had to learn K through 8 models kind of on the fly, but with the assistance of just some of the teachers in those respective grade levels, I've utilized the teaching tolerance. Teaching tolerance is, I think everyone is familiar with them. Needless to say, they're not about teaching just tolerance. They go deeper than that. That's just the name. It's dated. But they have a whole unit online. You just need to register, and it is on identity development. And that is catered for a younger students, and if not, it can definitely be scaffolded down. So I would check out teaching tolerance. And then Facing History, I've worked with Facing History and ourselves, FHAO, and they have excellent resources on social construction theory if you're interested in that, namely around race. But they also they know that you can't get to those conversations and to that content without just strong basic intro to identity. And so I would check out those 2 resources. They both should be online. I believe you have to sign up. I don't know if there's a fee associated with that, but as far as just basic identity, intro, beginner level lesson plans at the granular level, I mean, an advisor can probably do these without even the background necessarily. It wouldn't be ideal, right, for a lot of reasons, but I think at least it gives, any program at least a starting point.
I've been using the Facing History identity unit with my 7th graders.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those of you who have programs in elementary age children, how do you approach identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion work with that age group? And how does that work with community engagement and civic engagement or service? It's probably pretty straight service in some instances at that age. How do you how does that look at your schools? You're shaking your head, Damaris. Does it not look?
Yeah, we don't do that. That's not, I've been asking for it. I've been asking for that. And we actually, for the first time in many, many years, have a interim director of diversity and inclusion. And some of the work can you hear me? Some of the work I've been wanting to do with her is to develop, I can't, I don't want to, I don't want to, whatever the word is. I don't want to do this work with the elementary schools without them having this other piece before I get there. But what's the common language? I need to know when I get to the 1st grade, this is the work that they have done. This is the conversation that they've had. I mean, it's not standardized yet. So I think we're finally getting there. They have like what they call a community class in lower school where they're doing some of this work, but it's so new that it's not, it's not like somebody could say to me, this is what's being done. So I'm shaking my head because I'm like waiting for it. It's coming, but it's been coming slowly.
I mean, I would make the argument that it's actually easier in K4 than it is in other divisions, because it's just, it's less, curricula is less broken up by departments or discipline in K4, so it's actually easier to weave it into and have it integrated in the classroom experience. So, for instance, in kindergarten, we have a whole year-long study of this idea of community. What does it mean to be what is a community? What does it mean to be a part of a community? What is our role and responsibility in community? And that is, I guess this is similar to, as Ken was talking about, how freshman year at Urban, they just spend the whole year academics. I mean, you'll notice a lot of our service work here at Friends, the first semester, if not longer, is actually spent in kind of understanding issues, asking questions, see, think, wonder, doing a lot of reflection before they even step foot off campus. So that, I can't emphasize enough the importance of that kind of pre-work. But, back to kindergarten, they spend a whole year of looking at community, and that takes a lot of time to take this big concept, community. I mean, it's hard for adults to even understand what that means, let alone for 5- and 6-year-olds. So really holding their hands and starting small, they look at their families, they bring in photos of their families. That's a little example of a community. And notice all the different shapes and sizes of that community. Some are single parents, some have 2 dads, 2 moms, some have 6 kids, some have 1 kid, some are adopted, and really kind of breaking that down. They spend some time looking at that. Then they concentric circle out, look at their classroom as a community. What are the roles and responsibilities? Everyone has jobs, it rotates. We are all working towards tending to this community. Again, concentric circle out. What does it look like in our school community? Who are the people of our community? They interview the front desk person. They interview our maintenance staff. They interview head of school, me, understanding all of the different members of the community, trying to stretch that notion, that understanding for these little kids of what is community. And again, this is all over the course of several months. Then they go out into the greater community. They go to the library. They go to the police department. They go to the fire, and so it's all over time, stretching. When they go off campus, they go to our neighborhood homeless shelter. And they meet with the staff there. They take a tour, not when clients are there. But again, understanding their role and responsibility in tending towards our shared community. And then they do this whole integrated project where they are doing work to support the work of the homeless shelter. And it's really kind of woven into the fabric of what they're doing in their classes, art class, lesson studies in humanities, and all that kind of stuff. So I would say that it's actually easier in K4, which is, I was coming from a high school setting too, so I connect with Kent on that front. So K8, particularly K4, was all uncharted water for me. And as I began to learn more and more about it, I'm like, wow, this is actually simpler in many respects. 3rd grade, they do a whole immigration study where they take field trips to Chinatown, Angel Island. They then study refugees. What does it mean to be a refugee? Push and pull. Why are people coming to and from countries? And that leads up to work that they do with International Rescue Committee here in the Bay Area. So you wouldn't know that the difference between the service work and the classroom work, because they are totally integrated and woven into the fabric of the existing curriculum. So, and my role is to really kind of enhance that and play the liaison between our school and the existing organizations. A lot of these have been going on for several years now. So it's about upkeep, maintenance, deepening, enhancing, looking for opportunities for improvements there. So, yeah, I'm a big K4 fan. It's actually really easier in my work, I feel.
It reminds me of we had a regional meeting in New York, and Danielle was talking about at Spence how her K-3 program is spent almost exclusively on food, and how you can use food to represent your culture, but then to honor people. And that's how they sort of shape their buildup about who they are, and their identity is around food. And it sort of culminates before they go work at a food bank to serving a meal to one another or to their teachers or to their family. I'm a little unclear on exactly who they're serving, but going through the practice of serving a meal. I don't know. It's a language also. So I think teaching younger kids a language is always easier, because then they have those skills to rely upon when they are older. I'm aware of the time. I'm happy to continue to talk for as long as people would like to hang around, but it's almost 2 o'clock my time, and probably nearing, gosh, it's not even lunchtime for you guys out on the West Coast yet. But anyway, before we can continue to talk, but before people hang up, I would like to say 2 things. One is that Eliza texted me she had to leave. She had a crying junior on her couch that she felt she needed to tend to, which we all understand, school. She just wrote teaching ... And then Rachel had told me ahead of time that she had another appointment at 1:45, and I encouraged her to continue to participate with us, even though she had to head out early. And so anyway, Ken, I thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts, and for everybody for joining in. Dory is heading out. I can see she's sending us a note on the chat. I kind of like this Zoom a little bit better than Google. Sorry, don't let the Google people hear me say that over the internet. But anyway, we can continue talking, but I just wanted to make sure I appreciated everybody being here, and Ken for taking the time to share with us your infinite knowledge. I'm going to try to pull together these resources and share them with each other in an email. But if you have more that you'd like to share, please do with each other. I didn't BCC any of us yesterday, so we should have full access to each other's emails. So anyway. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
One last plug, Blake. We have the conference in February, so I hope to see everybody in live time there.
I think you'll see almost at least these faces. Most of these faces you'll see there. But thank you. And Guyby, I'm nominating you as our social media coordinator. I really appreciate you tagging me and everything. It's awesome. It's fantastic. And anybody else who is tweeting about any of this work, if you would tag us, NNSP. It's NNS Partnership is our handle. I would appreciate it. It's great. It's getting us a little buzz and spreading the word. So thank you guys, and I'll just hang out, and you guys can go as you need. I'm sure you all have work to do, but
thanks everyone. I appreciate it.
All right, I'll see you tomorrow, guys.
Yes,
Good to see you guys.
All right, bye everybody.
Everyone else.
We hanging up?
I'm here.
Can I ask you a quick question, actually, if you're going to stick around? So after this regional meeting that in New York that Blake was just referring to, so Rebecca Hong, do you know Rebecca Hong?
I know Rebecca, yeah.
Because she's from your area.
Yeah, she came from Lick, and she's out in New York now.
Yeah,
right.
She's at Spence. Right, she's the Director of Institutional Equity at Spence. And she wasn't at our meeting, Blake, was she? No, she wasn't.
Are you at Spence, Damaris, or no?
No, I'm at Nightingale Bamford.
Okay, I didn't catch that. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. But so we had this week, the week that we met with Danielle, with Blake, I had it was like all of my groups were having their fall meeting or whatever. So shortly after that, we had this meeting, Blake, with service directors. It was a service directors, but then Rebecca Hong and Danielle Passano from Spence organized this group. Both of them really wanted to be on this call today and couldn't be. But they pulled together a small group of people from various schools to talk about on this topic. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I had met Rebecca, and we walked to the restaurant together, and she had this really interesting comment that I said, I have said for years, I can't do my service work if students don't have the diversity inclusivity training ahead of time. And my work is dependent on that. And she said, well, I would argue that my work is also dependent on the community engagement, because what is the point of doing the sort of what you have been calling ethnic studies work if there's no action to follow it up? And it was such a different way of thinking about it for me. It's in some ways so obvious, and in some ways sort of like, oh, really sort of, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I just would love to hear your thoughts about that, and you know, if you agree, disagree, if it's more nuanced.
I mean, I think, you know, I think I said it earlier, but I mean, you can't do civic engagement without it. I mean, as far as
Can you do civic, but is it the opposite as well? Like she was sort of saying you can't, that they're mutually dependent, rather than I was thinking civic engagement depends on diversity training first. And she was saying there's no point in diversity training if you don't have this other action piece.
It's like the chicken and the egg.
Yeah, well, so I guess I would disagree to a certain extent that, you know, I just think that, so from an ethnic studies perspective, as someone who's, this is my background, for me, it's important just to get people, any person, especially the most privileged people, to learn how to reflect on their identities. It's equally important for those of us that are marginalized to be able to learn how to reflect in a healthy way and accept and acknowledge, you know, all of our identities. Now, I would never assume that there is an action piece included in that. So, so for me, I would disagree to a certain extent, because to me, it's just, you know, I think it's just healthy in general for anyone to be able to, you know, reflect on who they are and how they came to be and what is your history, and you know, how is that associated with, you know, your placement in society today? You know, how have your identities impacted your, you know, ability to see privilege, you know, or to combat privilege? So for me, it's, and I would do this even with my students. I don't expect my students, you know, in my ethnic studies class to be change agents. To me, it is enough for them to be able to just reflect. Like, I don't expect, I mean, to be blunt, I don't expect my white cisgender males, you know, to be change agents. I think it's enough for them at that stage. Do you at least acknowledge, you know, that you are white, that you are a white male, that you are cisgendered, and that possibly, you know, that gives you a leg up on society. Right. And if that door is open, then I feel like, boom, I've accomplished a lot. So I would separate the two, you know, and at the same time, I don't expect, you know, my young kids of color, you know, to be, you know, those fist pumping, brick throwing people, you know, in the streets. I don't expect that, because I think that's not fair that they feel like they would have to carry that burden. I mean, I think
they can.
Yeah.
So just like, obviously, you know, I work at a K-8 school, and so my kids would flow into urban, right? Or transition into where you're at, right? And so what we do in 5th grade, we do a whole year-long exploration, and we do it in trimesters. So the kids get about, I don't know, 8 classes, 9 classes on wellness. Then in the 6th grade, they do identity. So we kind of use the Visions Inc. framework. We do dimensions of self. We look at, we do a thing called a shoe mural, where they're like, what do I stand for? What binds me together? And that's their culminating project, right? So they do that community service in 7th grade. And then 8th grade is difficult because the kids are doing all of their high school visits and tours. So it's really difficult within the school day to get something organized for the 8th graders. So what I heard you say, which is interesting, is kind of the acknowledgement and the awareness of identity versus becoming a change maker, right? And so what do you think would be advantageous for our community? Because as we're trying to really kick and try to figure things out, is it reasonable for an 8th grader and a goal for them to be change agents? Is that what our drive should potentially be? Or is it to really have a strong reflection of one's identity and how they develop their interpersonal skills, how they relate to our culture, you know, as such? You know?
You know, I think when I was younger, and I was a teacher, I taught ethnic studies a long time ago. You know, in Berkeley, at Berkeley High. It was the only school in the country that had, you know, an ethnic studies department. And this is what, 20 years ago. And that was my goal. My goal was to turn every single kid into a change agent. And I just, now that I'm older, I just don't think, and this is hard to say, I just don't think it's fair to expect that. I mean, different students, like adults, we all have different skills, different aptitudes. You know, I think the thing with identity development and civic engagement is that those students that want to be or are right to be change agents are the ones that are going to gravitate towards your program, because that part of themselves is not being fed in math, science, history, English, and whatnot. I'm actually working with a client right now on developing a varsity class, you know, on civic engagement specifically for those students. And it's kind of the model that we're doing is like, it's in the model of like, well, we have a strong theater program for the theater kids. So I guess to answer your question, I think it's at least get them to think about who they are, but I don't necessarily, me personally, at least not right now, I don't expect every single child that I work with, you know, to be a change agent. I just don't know if that is
Interesting.
appropriate or fair. And that's very difficult for me to say. And as I say it, I'm like, I have all my counter arguments against my own thought. So, but I think in particular in very privileged institutions, you know, where we work, I think it has, if you have that expectation, I think it may have a very damaging and the opposite effect, especially on young white boys. I mean, I've seen that where, you know, they actually get more entrenched because they're not given the space to just be in their own skin. And I've also seen it damage kids of color, you know, where, you know, teachers will put this expectation on them where, okay, yeah, you need to maximize this opportunity, you need to give back. Well, I don't know if that's fair. That kid is just trying to be a student in school. Do you know what I'm saying? And so, so I don't know. I don't know. And as I say that again, I'm contradicting myself in my brain. If you could read my thought bubble, I have a lot of counter arguments to everything I just said.
I think that like you might be able to embrace both notions if you switch up the vocabulary you're using. And this is just these are my free thoughts right this very second. But instead of saying change agents, what if you just wanted engaged citizens, right? So you're not suggesting that every kid has to be working towards social justice or social change, but that they have to be an active participant in their community in some way, shape, or form. That would be your goal. So it doesn't delineate exactly how they are engaged, and you will embrace those kids that are change agents or working towards social change, but you'll allow freedom for kids to be engaged by open to discussion or free to experience something that's different or contribute in a different way that I'm not thinking about right this second. But instead of saying change agents, if you just allow them to be engaged, that just means they're participating actively in their community. It's just a thought.
What do you think, Aaron? I don't know, man.
I mean, I'm kind of with that. Yeah, no, I'm with that, because literally, I mean, if you look at my office right now, I have all these chart papers about service learning and what are we doing and how. We have to do this big presentation on the 29th about our service learning program. So this is a great timing to have this conversation. Yet I do struggle with the notion of transforming young privileged boys in all different ways to becoming change agents by 8th grade, especially coming from a K-4 program that does not address different levels of identity, right? And so there's tension within me. Because, you know, you look at best practice, you look at Friends School, you look at Prospect Sierra, all these other schools that are creating these aware citizens, and yet ours are falling by the side, you know, not that level, don't have that level of skill. And is that because we're reaching too far, you know, or are we not really developing and focusing on what we could actually achieve with actual action items? So those are things that there's creating tension. Because when they go to urban, I want them to be thriving in your program, right? Or when they go to Lick, or when they go to Head Royce. Yet, how do we assess that we're actually achieving our goals too, and not just trying to, transform them into high school little social activists,
Yeah. I mean, I hear that. And I think the thing that I would add is also just, I think what I'm saying by, just planting the seed. Like, I think so often, like the kids, you think they don't get it, right? And then they go out into the world, they go out into the Midwest or other parts of the country. And I say that now as a Midwesterner, because this Californian lives in the Midwest now. But, then they come back and they're like, I think all you can do is just plant those seeds and hope. But I don't want to expect, because I just don't think that's fair. But I've had a lot of, white students via Facebook or, alumni, and they're like, thanks. You know what? I'm not that kid that I was when I was at Urban. Now, not every single, cisgender white student, gets to that, but I mean, you never know. We're all on our journey, I guess, is what I would say too, is that we're all on our journey and we really don't know the impact that we have, and what seeds are actually planted and can grow.
I often talk about, when we talk about keeping data about the value of this work, that the data needs to be kids that are in college or out of college, because I don't think that your perspective on this experience is really fully developed until you have a lot of time to reflect back. I think about when I went to the Soviet Union when I was in 10th grade, and those 4 weeks were the longest, hardest 4 weeks of my life at that time. But as an adult, really important, transformative, impactful 4 weeks. But if you had asked me 3 weeks after I had come back, how great was my trip, my opinion would have been extremely different. So I do think that what Ken is saying is true. Like, you probably need to look at what your kids are doing when they go to all these different schools and they're met where they are. But another thing that I say a lot is that the benefit of having a K to whatever program, K4, K8, is that you also have an opportunity to help educate parents about why this work is important and help support that work through conversations at home, what have you. So I was going to question, you're comparing your program to Prospect Sierra, Friends, etc. Is the family dynamic the same? Is the parental support of this work the same at your school as it is at these other schools? And if not, maybe that's one way to look at how you can support this work and sort of grow its strength in K5, is also involve the parents in this conversation. Because in my perspective, and I'm sure you've all heard me say this, is that when my kids were in kindergarten, I really didn't have any idea what I was supposed to be doing. And if a school had come and told me, these are the absolute core things that we need to work on for your kid's success in life, I would have bought in and I'd be working on it to this day. So I'm sure there's a lot of other parents that are like that just want to be told or guided to how to strengthen their children to the best extent. So that's the advantage of having young kids, is you have young parents, parents who are not, ingrained in their habits already. So.
You guys, I have to go.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody has to go.
Thank you so much for this. This is was really a pleasure to meet you, Ken. And I'm sorry, I missed your name. Is it Aaron?
Yes, Aaron.
Nice to meet you too, Aaron. And I'm really interested in your matrix thing about I'm gonna do that, because I just this morning sat at my desk and I was like, I'm not doing enough, but I don't really know what's going on. I don't know who's doing what, and I got to find a way to find it out. So maybe I'm gonna be like following behind you.
All good.
Well, maybe we should have this conversation again just to follow up and keep talking about it. I don't think this is a 1 hour discussion. So it's really great to have all of you guys engaged and talking, and it makes my day so much brighter to have all these faces to look at. I think we can all sign off. Ken, thank you so much. Aaron, I'm so glad this wasn't our regional meeting. For everybody else, Aaron is hosting a regional meeting for us in March, and he got my reminder yesterday, and he thought that the regional meeting was today, and that he had missed it. So it's much easier to prepare for. But anyway, I will talk to you all soon. And please, I say this all the time, the more you ask of NNSP, the more we can help you. So if you have things that you want to follow up with, please, please, please reach out to us, and we will do our best to support you all in the growth of your programs.
Okay.
So,
Thank you,
Aaron,
Blake.
this is Bud. It's good to see you, Aaron.
Always a pleasure.
Nice to meet you, Blake. We'll talk soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.